to listen to. And I don't think of myself as running against anyone. I think of myself as running with a lot of really good people. And they're all telling you the truth. And you're doing your due diligence to listen to all of them. But I have a view of things that is unique. We all have a view of things that is unique. Everybody's telling you the truth. But we need to do more right now than to tell the truth. We need to do what happens when you go into a court of law and you raise your hand and you swear to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. The president, as we know, tells lies sometimes. The only thing that's going to override that is someone telling truth on as amazing a level as that man lies. Same old, kind of sort of traditional political truth-telling is not going to be enough to get the job done. We have to tell the truth, not just on the level of symptom, but on the level of root cause. And when we start talking about the truth on the level of root cause, we begin having a conversation that none of the political establishment is too happy with, because the political establishment itself is the root cause. It's very common for Democrats to love this fictional narrative that all of our problems started with Donald Trump, but they simply did not. Donald Trump did not cause the worst problems we're dealing with. Donald Trump is a symptom of the worst cause of things that we have been dealing with to some extent for the last 40 years. Donald Trump, in my opinion, is an opportunistic infection that could not have gotten hold of us had the entire system not become diseased. There was a weakened societal immune system, and each and every one of us as American citizens are immune cells, and we have been weakened. The founders left the power in our hands. But power is not in your hands if it's not in your heart and it's not in your head. We have farmed out our thinking. We have lent out our power to a political class, and now we seem shocked at where this has taken us. Well, it's true that with Donald Trump even having the prospect of a second term, we could, if he were to be reelected, go over the cliff. But we need to do more than just not go over the cliff. We need to get out of the vicinity of the cliff. And we have been in the vicinity of the cliff for a long time. If all we do is defeat Donald Trump, then the same forces that he represents will be back in full force in the midterms in 22 and in the presidential election in 24. There are many lined up behind him. It is a big mistake for us to think that this is only about Donald Trump. This is about the threat of an authoritarianism, a global authoritarianism, which is nothing short of neo-fascist in its leanings. No American generation has ever been called upon to be more vigilant and to be more passionately defensive of the principles of American democracy. Other generations have done it, and we can do it too. Abolitionists pushed back against slavery. Women's suffragettes pushed back against the systematic and institutionalized suppression of women. The civil rights movement pushed back against segregation and institutionalized white supremacy. There were big jobs that those people had to do, but they did them. And now it's our turn. Let's not be the first generation of Americans to wimp out on doing what it takes to protect our democracy. But I'll tell you what it does not take. It does not take an immature, it does not take an irresponsible or a foolish dependence on a political status quo to do the job for us. A political status quo does not disrupt itself. A political status quo perpetuates itself. The U.S. government did not wake up one day and decide to abolish slavery. The U.S. government did not wake up one day and decide to give women the right to vote. And the U.S. government did not wake up one day and decide to dismantle slavery. The abolitionist movement came from the people. The people rose up and the people stepped in. The women's suffragette movement came from the people. The people woke up, the people rose up, and the people stepped in. And the civil rights movement also. It was the people who rose up, the people who stepped in. And I'm running for president with a message, it's time again for the people to step in. Now, the U.S. Constitution doesn't even mention political parties. And George Washington warned us against them. He said that it would form factions of men who would be more concerned with their party than with their country. Now, I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I'm old enough to be a Bobby Kennedy Democrat. I remember a time when the Democratic Party was unequivocal in its support of the people. When the Democratic Party was where you went, if you were committed to the idea of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But something terrible began to happen in this country. It began to happen in the 1980s, and some of us are old enough to remember when it happened. It began with the Republicans, but then there are ways which, because of the undue influence of money on our system, many forces, even within the Democratic Party, have acquiesced and conspired. It started with a virulent form of capitalism. Now, I want to make this clear. I am a capitalist. I do not consider myself anti-capitalist. There are people who disagree on this, but in my opinion, the problem here is not inherent in capitalism. It is a particularly virulent strain of capitalism, however, which was introduced by a group of people at the University of Chicago. They were called the Chicago Boys. The main articulator was a man named Milton Friedman, but I want to mention something about Milton Friedman in a few minutes, because he does not deserve actually the bad rap he gets. The idea was this, that market forces should become the sole organizing principle of American society. The government should get out of the way with any of those pesky regulations. They called it job-killing regulations. We call them safety regulations, health regulations, workers' rights regulations. But forget any of that. The idea of trickle-down economics was that all that a corporation should have to be responsible for is the short-term profits of its stockholders. Right, this woman is laughing because many of us were laughing ironically at the time. It was so ridiculous. The idea was that all that the corporation should owe is fiduciary responsibility to its stockholders. It should be untethered or unfettered by any kind of moral or ethical or governmental consideration. And the idea that was being presented to us was that this would be good for everybody, see, because the small stockholder class would make so much money, and all of that money would trickle down. It would trickle down and it would lift all boats. Well, we're all laughing because after 40 years, the jury is in. This has not lifted all boats. It has left millions of people without even a life vest. It has decimated America's middle class. It has created the largest income inequality since 1929, and it has left 1% of the American people owning more wealth than the bottom 90%. Now, not only, and if you read books such as Dark Money by Janet Mayer, not only were there really just a few billionaires who did all the work to make sure that these ideas were articulated, to make sure that candidates were elected, Ronald Reagan and so forth. In addition to that, within 10 to 15 years afterwards, the money that began to exert itself as an influence in Washington became so great, the Supreme Court saying that money was free speech, all of that climaxing with the Supreme Court decision a few years ago, in which it was made complete. Corporations were given complete and unfettered power to flood our system with money. What has happened over the last 40 years is such a massive transfer of wealth into the hands of a few people through tax cuts such as the 2017 $2 trillion tax cut, where 83 cents of every dollar went to the very richest corporations and individuals, even though, even as of this week, it has absolutely been established, there's no sense that this will ever even pay for itself, much less be an economic stimulus for the rest of the country. Through corporate subsidies, through all of the ways that big pharmaceutical companies, defense contractors, health insurance companies, food companies, chemical companies, gun manufacturers, agribusiness, and oil and gas. This corporate aristocracy now controls Washington. We are not a government of the people and by the people and for the people. We are a government of, by, and for a few of the people. We are a government of, by, and for these multinational corporations. And our government, more than anything, does more to advocate with our public policies, does more to advocate for the short-term profits for those corporate entities than it does to advocate for us. Now, I'd like to take a moment to all of us just be silent for a minute and think about what this means. Democracy is dying on our watch. And that's not something we should just, okay, get another cup of coffee. This late Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said, you can either have large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of a few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both. And when Abraham Lincoln stood on the battlefield at Gettysburg, where all those thousands of people had died, he spoke of the men who had died there as having given the last full measure of devotion. And he said that they had died there so that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people would not perish from the earth. It's perishing now. It is perishing under our watch. This has been happening for 40 years. It did not begin with Donald Trump's presidency. But what it did do, however, is it made the businessman God. It made the businessman God. Now, I'm old enough to remember a time when it was not like this. I'm not saying America was perfect before the 1980s. I'm not romanticizing or glamorizing or pretending that we had it all together before the 1980s, but I can tell you this, and there are some people in this room old enough to remember, there was a social consensus. We were supposed to be good. We were supposed to. And even when we didn't make it, it was in the air that we got, ooh, we should be. You know, when I was young, during the Vietnam War, there was something called the My Lai massacre. Anybody here remember the My Lai massacre? How can you remember the My Lai massacre? You learned about it. So the My Lai massacre.
I read it in the paper.
For those of you youngins who don't know, during the Vietnam War, some American soldiers massacred a village of Vietnamese. That's the bad news. What's the good news? The country knew enough and was morally centered enough to hang our heads in shame. We didn't just mention it and go about our business. It's all we talked about for a while. Article after article, magazine after magazine, news story after news story. That was healthy. The country registered, ooh, that shouldn't happen. Are you with me? Today, for the sake of a $360 billion arms sale to Saudi Arabia, with that murderous dictator, crown prince, for the sake of a $360 billion arms sale to Saudi Arabia, we're participating. We're giving aerial support to a genocidal war that has starved tens of thousands of people, including 85,000 children. Hear much about it? Now, there was a bipartisan effort to stop it. Trump overrode it. They were not able to override his veto. But you know what? The other day, in the new defense budget that was passed by a Democratic House of Representatives, not only was the NDAA reauthorized. Now, let's talk about that alone. The Constitution of the United States says that in order for the United States to be at war, the president has to ask congressional permission and approval. But after 9/11, we all know the famous story. FDR had to go to, after Pearl Harbor, had to go to Congress. He said that, talked about the day of infamy. He had to get congressional approval to enter World War II. But after 9/11, Congress passed the National Defense Authorization Act, which gives to the president permission to basically do whatever you need to do to quote unquote fight terrorism. And that means that we have completely broken with a fundamental constitutional principle of congressional approval. Rather, the president can do whatever the president wants to do. So in this, once again, the Democratic House passed this. This is before it even gets to the Republican Senate. The Democratic House passed the budget, $738 billion, not in any way limiting what the president can do. As a matter of fact, giving him even more power to participate with the Saudis in that war. It does nothing to limit his power. Now, we're talking about Donald Trump as president, and because of the NDAA, which was just reauthorized once more by a Democratic House, if the president wants to take military action against Iran, he can. And let's not forget what else happened the other day. We now have a sixth branch of the U.S. military. We now have a Space Force. Everybody aware of that? So you youngins, in case you like to we all like to lie on the grass. Maybe you like to I don't know what you do on the grass, but lying up against, looking at the stars, you won't even know what's pointing back at you. Now, we all know that, they've been doing some stuff in space for a while. We're not stupid. We get that. But a whole branch of the military. Do you know how much money that means? Think of the money the Air Force gets. Think of the money the Army gets. Think of the money that the Navy gets. There was a whole branch. This was passed by a Democratic House. Now, this is the problem. We're not even discussing this. Mm-hmm. We're putting a military branch in space. We're not overseeing our employees in Washington. Not only that, if a Democratic House passed that, you know what that means? That means that the military contractors so own this government. Yeah. They so own it. That day that they passed that National Defense Authorization Act once more, but more than that, the fact that they then authorized a sixth branch of the U.S. military, let me tell you what happened. Because, everything I'm talking to you about here today, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Okay, so can we just start having a real conversation as adults? This is what kills me. I have a 35-year career working up close and personal with people whose lives are in trouble. And what it has shown me is that people are smart. People are smart. The American people are not stupid. But when it comes to politics, we all go dumb. We would never allow ourselves to be played like this in our personal lives. We would never allow somebody, we talk about boundaries, not letting somebody abuse you, not letting somebody pull the wool over your eyes. Why do collectively, when it comes to politics, we have allowed ourselves to be trained? We become mentally trained into this learned powerlessness. And so what's happening now? Space Force, we're not even talking about it. Genocidal war that we're participating in, we're not even talking about it. This is what I mean by an opportunistic infections. That was so easy. So let's paint the picture a little bit in case anybody hasn't really looked into this in your own mind. That day, the other day, when they passed this sixth military force, so I'll tell you what the military contractors did that day. In the offices of Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, whomever, they took out champagne bottles. Oh, they popped those champagne corks. They clicked their glasses, and they probably said something along this line. And we were able to do that with a Democratic House. Let them have their elections. Now, are there people who try? Bernie Sanders has certainly taken a stand about Yemen. Ro Khanna and Bernie Sanders spoke up the other day about the military, the force. But you and I have to wake up. You and I have to wake up. Because this is the way it works today. So do you think that any of that was discussed on the debate stage? Because the last debate was right after, a day or two after the establishment of the military of the Space Force. You think that was going to be talked about? And let me ask you that you also think it was going to be discussed on that debate stage that we have 13 million hungry children, 100,000 homeless children. We have children, yes, here in Iowa, just like in every state, where there are elementary school children on suicide watch. Where your public schools, yes, here in Iowa, as well as every place else, have trauma rooms. Where millions of American children have been diagnosed with PTSD. Where millions of American children go to school every single day in classrooms where they don't even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. The vulnerabilities and the challenges of the American child today. Let me ask you this. Here's a coffee shop. Anybody here work at this coffee shop? Anybody here working? You work here. So let me ask you a question. Let's say there was an established pattern of mass shootings at coffee shops. Wouldn't that affect you emotionally and psychologically when you came to work every day? How would that be for you if you were 12 years old? We talking about that? We talking about that on the debate stage? Because this virulent strain of capitalism, you see, has no use for children. And it has no use for old people because it can't serve it. And when you have a government that now serves them rather than serving the people, children, they're not old enough to vote, so there's no constituency there. They're not old enough to work, so they have no financial leverage. And most of the children that we're talking about who are in the most trouble, they have parents who don't necessarily vote either. So their despair has simply been normalized. This is millions and millions of children. If you notice when the politicians do talk about at-risk populations, they're usually talking about people who vote, but children don't vote. We're talking millions and millions of children here. And I'd like to say, just as a woman to the other women in the room, where are we? Where are we? You know, one of the common anthropological characteristics of every advanced mammalian species that survives and thrives is the fierce behavior of the adult female of that species when she senses a threat to her cubs. Mama bears, tigers, lions. You get near their babies, they're coming after you. We have been so trained. We are like frogs in hot water. That's what the American citizen has become. And it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and the frog doesn't even recognize when it's boiling. So let me tell you how it's gonna, no, I'm not gonna tell you, I'm gonna ask you, how's it gonna work, this whole thing? Let's go back to the peace and war thing for a moment. $760 billion in a military budget every year, $40 billion for the State Department. Within the State Department, there's $17 billion. That's the USAID, that's humanitarian assistance, humanitarian aid and long-term development. And then $1 billion more, a little bit less than $1 billion, what's called the peace building agencies. And the peace builders expand economic opportunities for women and expand educational opportunities for children and reduce violence against women and ameliorate unnecessary human despair. That's how you wage peace. Even Donald Rumsfeld, who was Secretary of Defense under George Bush, said, we're gonna have to learn how to wage peace. Do you just take medicine, or do you not also have to cultivate your health? So are we gonna just endlessly prepare for war and one day, I don't know, hope maybe it turns into peace? No, we don't even have a conversation about it anymore. Once again, I'm an older woman. I remember we had banned the bomb protests. We have become so exhausted. We have become so worn down, we don't even discuss it. So how do you think this is gonna work? You think we're gonna just like make sure the Iranians don't get a nuke, which I'm not minimizing the importance of doing that, actually, and I would rejoin the Iranian deal. I'm gonna keep the North Koreans from getting one. Once again, I'm not minimizing the need to do that. But you can't just always be trying to fight off the next person who has a nuke. You have to also be looking at the world and trying to cultivate the possibility of a situation in which there would ever be peace on earth. JFK was not just spouting poetry when President Kennedy said that if humanity does not end war, war will end mankind. What are we doing? And no person should only live for ourselves, and no generation should only live for itself. The United States should be declaring that by the end of this century, and we should have a president who declares this, we should have a president who declares that by the end of this century, if there is not peace on earth, because of the actions we are willing to take, that we are willing to have a Department of Peace as well as a Department of Defense, and we are going to have a peace academy as well as a military academy, that we're going to play peace games as well as war games, that we are going to lead the world on a path towards the possibility that at the end of this century, if war has not been eradicated, at least humanity will be in a position to feel reasonably like that just might happen within the next few decades. See, the United States doesn't do great things anymore, but we're hardwired for great things. This country was born out of a great things. We're not tired just because we're busy. We're tired because we're not doing important things. And we're not even asking for it anymore. We're looking at candidates like, we'll tweak it here and we'll tweak it there. We should not only declare peace on this earth, we should have a Department of Peace, we should have a Department of Children and Youth. We should declare, you need a president that declares that every school will become a palace of learning and culture and the arts. We will end the immoral way the immoral way that we basically base our educational funding on property taxes, so that a child from a well-to-do family has a good chance in America of a very high-quality public school education. But if they don't, well, too bad. And do you know, think about this, with every child whose brain we fail to develop to the best of our ability, we are leaving money on the table. When you're talking about millions and millions of uneducated children, you're leaving millions and billions and possibly trillions of dollars on the table that will not be in the U.S. economy later. And these people have the audacity to say that the economy is good. Who's it good for? It's good for them. For the people who own the media companies that are saying that. Would we allow ourselves in our personal lives to have the wool pulled over our eyes this way? Another one, of course, is with all of our economic policies, 93 million people live in near poverty in the United States. 93 million. So what does it mean to live in near poverty? These are not just numbers. These are human beings having human experiences of suffering. 93 million people living near poverty means tens of millions of people who every single day really don't know what would happen if they get sick. And they really don't know what would happen if their kids got sick. And they really have no idea how they'll send their kids to college. And they have no idea how they will ever get out from under these college loan debts. And then we wonder where the mental health crisis comes from. How can the situation that I just described to you not create tension, not create anxiety, and not create depression? And then the same politicians, we looked at the politicians and asked, what are you going to do about the mental health crisis? You know what I say to those politicians? I don't know. Why don't you stop driving everybody crazy? We're looking to people to solve the problem who created the problem. They fund the problem creators. They are not funding the problem solvers. Now, there are some wonderful people in Washington, and there are wonderful people running for president. It's the system that is so corrupt. It is the system that is so corrupt. It's not about individuals. I have a lot of respect for a lot of people within that system. Somebody's got to disrupt the entire system, call the entire system. And when you're in the system, you're not allowed to call the system. Everybody in this room knows that Barack Obama was not the president we thought we were electing in 2008. And he got Obamacare, which was as far as the health insurance companies would allow him to go. But that system says that anybody not from their system is unqualified, to do what you do. They say that anybody not from their system is dangerous, to you guys. And we are looking to a corporate elite, a subset of a political establishment that's its own corporate elite. And we as Democrats particularly are looking to them and saying, please protect us from the corporate elite. They are the corporate elite. You know, when the founder said that the power is in the hands of the people, it's not in your hands if it's not in your heart and it's not in your mind. You know, in the Jewish religion, something very interesting is said. It's said in Judaism that every generation has to discover God for itself. And that's true of American democracy. Every generation has to take this in. Every generation has to re-engage with the rambunctiousness and the radicalism of American democracy. The idea that this is a government of the people, by the people, for the people, that everybody's equal, that everybody has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that the function of a government, the reason governments are instituted is to secure those rights, and if those rights are not being secured, that it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish that government. That's what the Declaration of Independence says. Now, I'm not suggesting we abolish it, but am I suggesting we alter it? Oh, you better believe it. And I will say to those of us who do not wish to see Donald Trump reelected, offering to the American people any option less rambunctious than that, you're not going to override the rambunctiousness of the Trump forces. He tells big lies, and the only thing that's going to defeat him is some big truths. You need a candidate. You know how he says things, and he's lying so much, you go, oh my God, I cannot believe he even said that. You know who's going to defeat him? Somebody saying truth that is so truthful that you say, oh my God, I can't believe she just said that. denial about what's coming at us here. Forget the 20th century. It's over. Forget this nice, you know what the forces on the left are like now. And once again, listen, whoever the Democratic nominee is, I'm so in for it. That's not even a question. But the Democratic Party has got to stop being something where we're not allowed to look at ourselves. We're not allowed to look in the mirror. Does the Democratic Party, let us not forget what happened here. The American people rejected the candidate who said, let's continue with the success of the last 8 years, because of the millions of people in Washington, not Washington, but in Pennsylvania, Florida, etc., who felt success. I'm freaking dying here. And people who felt that the situation was rigged against them were right. It is rigged. It is rigged, and a little bit less rigged is not the answer. We have, George Lakoff is a writer who years ago said that the Republican Party is like an abusive father. No, he said it's like a stern father, and the Democratic Party is like the nurturing mother. Well, we've gone down the road from there now. We have one party that's the abusive father, and another party, which in too many cases is the enabling mother. And when you grow up and you go to therapy and you process your anger, your first anger that you process is not against the father who whipped you, it's against the mother who stood in the hall, wringing her hands, so upset about it, but not calling the police. And when we get this is what Lincoln meant by a new birth of freedom. We have to regenerate the truth of this. What's happened now is when you take those principles of the Declaration of Independence and they're inscribed on marble walls, or they're written in parchment, but they're not inscribed in our hearts. Why is it? What has happened to us that the only real rambunctiousness you see now is on the part of Trump supporters? There's a radicalism to the American experiment. Healthcare is the next issue where you see this. Our politicians are talking about how they're going to pay for healthcare. Now, my whole health plan, which you can see at Marianne 2020, my whole health plan definitely provides for universal health care. I do believe a public option is the way to go. But the question should not just be, how do we pay for health care? We have to go, like I said, not just symptom, but root cause. I'm not just saying, here's how I'll provide universal health care. I want to say to you, hey guys, how come so many of us are so sick? How come there's so much chronic illness in this country compared to the citizens in other countries of comparable wealth? Well, I'll tell you, because of the contaminants in our water, because of the carcinogens in our food, because of the toxins in our air. But hey, you start addressing those things, you're going to have to deal with the chemical companies and the food companies and agribusiness and oil and gas. And hey, a lot of money comes from those guys. Big pharmaceutical companies lobbied Congress last year to the tune of $284 million, and oil and gas to the tune of $125 million. Not only that, I'd also like to point out that because of the pharmaceutical companies and their influence through the money that they give to medical schools, the average doctor in the United States, when in medical school, had one class during one semester of the relationship between food and health and sickness. So when you go to a doctor in the United States, the high probability is that once you get your diagnosis, the doctor will be giving you the pharmaceutical and the surgical option that he or she recommends. In my whole health plan, part of the patient's Bill of Rights is that it will be mandated when you are diagnosed with an illness, that you are also shown the scientifically established results of studies comparing food, dietary, and lifestyle changes in their efficacy with healing or even reversing disease to the same comparable way that do surgical and pharmaceutical options. Not only that, with my plan, your insurance has to pay for that as well. We're just at the effect of this corporate aristocracy. And I want to go back a little bit to Milton Friedman. For a long time, I thought he was the big boogeyman. It was all because of Milton Friedman. But you know what? He's given a bad rap, because you know what I realized once I started reading up? Milton Friedman himself said, none of this is safe without a universal basic income. So that universal basic income, which I support, goes far, far back. So here we are. ladies and gentlemen. We are, the American citizen has been turned into a little more than a kind of serf, you know. But in 1776, we repudiated an aristocracy. Isn't it time to repudiate it again? I want a Department of Children and Youth. I want a massive realignment of investment in the direction of America's children. I would want a United States Department of Peace. Right now, when the president has a meeting, a national security meeting, this is how it goes. We've got your military guys. And by the way, I'm a big fan of the U.S. military. My father fought in World War II. This is none of this is a critique of the military. These are political decisions. These are not military decisions that we're talking about here. Right now, however, when they have a national security meeting, you have the military guys and you have the defense contractors. You know, even Donald Trump. This is true of people who are mentally imbalanced. Every once in a while, they say something profoundly true. Have you noticed that? He himself uttered one day, well, you know, the military-industrial complex runs this place. Did you hear him say that? Yeah. So right now, President meets with his or her national security team. You've got the military, and you've got the defense contractors, and then the peace builders, the peace-building agencies, the people who actually create factors that statistically mean a higher incidence of peace and a lower incidence of conflict. They're in the other room. And the president, or whoever runs the meeting, says, we'll call you in when we need you. If I were president, this is how it would be. That national security meeting would be the military, and it would be the peace builders, who would now be in robust partnership. And the defense contractors would be in the other room. And I would say to them, thank you, gentlemen, we'll call you in when we need you. Right now, the U.S. Air Force has ordered 100 B-21 Raiders. Anybody here know about the B-21 Raider? I want you to know about it because this is your money. The B-21 Raider is a bomber. Each one costs $560 million. Although by the time they're finished, who knows how much it will cost, probably over $6 million. Each one is a bomber. Okay, we're American citizens. We get that the Air Force has to have bombers. I don't think any of us would say they shouldn't have bombers. Okay, they're going to have bombers. But the interesting thing about the B-21 bomber, the Raider, is that they drop not only conventional bombs, they also drop nuclear bombs. Now, once again, let's think about this. What do we need 100 airplanes that drop nuclear bombs for? Because you drop 5 of those, it's over for human civilization as we know it. And be clear, the nuclear bomb, the smallest nuclear bomb on the planet today, makes Hiroshima and Nagasaki look like a pinprick. You drop 5 of those, it's over for human civilization as we know it. You drop 10 of those, it's over. Do you think that the fact that we're spending $560 million each on 100 airplanes for the B-21 Raider, while 13 million American children are hungry, 100,000 are homeless, and millions of people have to work 2-3 jobs a day just to put food on the table, do you think this has anything to do with our safety? Do you think this has anything to do with our security while we're ordering those planes? So my question to you is, how far does this go before the people slip in? How far down the road are we going to go with this? I also believe the United States should pay its historical debts, because whether you're a country or you're an individual, you can't have the future you want unless you're willing to clean up the past. Let's just do it. Let's pay reparations for slavery. Let's take reparative measures towards Native Americans. Germany has paid since 1945 $89 billion in reparations towards Jewish organizations. Doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but it's gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the Jews. And in 1988, Ronald Reagan signed the American Civil Liberties Act, whereby all the surviving prisoners from the Japanese internment camps during World War II were given between $20,000 and $22,000. So by the middle of the 20th century, the idea of one nation that had harmed another nation giving economic remuneration was not considered a fringe idea. And it shouldn't be considered a fringe idea now either. So whether it's the things that I've just mentioned to you, or the fact that we need a mass World War II level mass mobilization to reverse climate change, and there are other candidates who are on that. That just makes sure you get a resident Democrat and you're going to get the climate issue dealt with. There are others who recognize what an emergency this is. If we don't take radical action within the next 7 years, we could have a level of massive social collapse in the next 20 years that is unlike anything that we've ever seen in the modern era. And I want to ask you a question. Is anybody in this room ever heard a young person say, or even might have been a young person, say, I don't think I'm going to have children because I look down the road and I just don't see any hope? How many, raise your hand if you've heard someone say that. Just keep your hands up for a minute. And let us all just take note how abnormal and aberrational this is. This isn't supposed to happen. It's one thing if people feel like, I don't want to have kids. That's natural, that's normal. Or vegans. Vegans have been saying it for years. I get that. But this is just people who would normally like to have kids. That's what's supposed to happen in the human race. People propagate. And we're the richest country in the world. And when I asked you that question, I knew it was a reasonable assumption based on every other room I've been in that quite a few of you would raise your hands, which you did. At what point are we going to register something is really wrong here? And you need a president who names it and says it. I did not tell you anything today you don't already know. Maybe some details, B-21 rate or whatever. Doesn't matter. Basically, you know. We're not stupid people. The problem is not that we're stupid people. We are not stupid. We are good. We are dignified people. I'm not saying we're better than other people, but we're as good as anybody else. The problem is not that we're not good people. The problem is not that we don't want conscience to dictate our personal behavior, our individual behavior, because we do. I think the average American wants to do the right thing, wants to treat other people well. That's not where the problem lies. The problem lies in the horrific, immoral gap at this point between the guidance system of our individual behavior and the guidance system of our public policies, both domestically and internationally. Now, the way this country was set up to be a quote-unquote representative democracy, it was going to be okay because we were going to elect the representatives who would then quote-unquote do our will. So if we're good people who care about other people, the government would be good and it would do good things for other people. It has been hijacked. It has been corrupted by an amoral economic system. It's not an immoral economic system. It's not that people wake up in the morning trying to figure out how to hurt a child or hurt an indigenous tribe or hurt the planet. It's just that they wake up in the morning thinking it's not their responsibility to have to think about those things. And when you have a government who doesn't think it's responsibility to care about those things, you have not only a corruption of our government, but you have a hijacking of America's moral value system. We now have entire generations that don't even remember when America wasn't at war. And we have older generations who remember, but we're so exhausted at this point, we don't even bother to mention it anymore. The problem with going to sleep is if you stay asleep too long, it becomes hard to wake up. So, as I said, we've got a bigger problem on our hands than just Donald Trump. And if we don't start doing some radical truth-telling, then I'm afraid all those radical lies out there are going to overwhelm us. And I don't think any of us want to feel that we were the generation on whose watch this beautiful, beautiful thing got lost. As a candidate, I've experienced both political universes. I've experienced the campaign industrial complex, how that system works, how they make sure that it's only the candidates they want you to hear. I've learned about how the money operates. I've gotten it. And then there's another political universe. And that's what's happening in this room. This is so profound. This is so profound. As a woman, there are countries, and there are a lot of them, where if I said a fraction of what I've said to you today, in criticism of my government, I would be hauled off, almost assuredly tortured, and possibly worse. No policeman's going to come in here and tell us to break it up. That's not where the chains lie. The chains lie in our heads. So there's something very profound that the founders really didn't leave it in the hands of the DNC. The founders didn't leave it in the hands of CNN. The founders didn't leave it in the hands of a political establishment, but the founders did leave it in your hands. And we need to remember that, and we need to protect that, and we need to take a stand for that. And when we do, and other generations have done it before, when we do, Winston Churchill said that you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other option. We're kind of famous historically for getting there late, but it's also a historical trend that when we do get there, we slam it like nobody's business. On the other side of this, there is the most beautiful chapter imaginable. I've seen it in Iowa. I've seen it in every state I have visited, and I visited a lot of them. We have the people who know what to do. You have the early childhood experts. You have the educators. You have the social workers. You have the mental health counselors. You have the environmentalists. You have the peace builders. You have them in Iowa. You have them everywhere. The American people are not the problem. We have the problem solvers. We have the ingenuity. We have the people who know what to do to reverse from a dirty economy to a clean economy. We know the people who know what to do to reverse from a war economy to a peace economy. We have the people who know what to do to save these children. We have everything we need. But what we also have is a government that does more to fund the problem creators than to fund the problem solvers. This will only stop when we, the people, say so. This needs to stop now. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now I'd like to answer any questions anybody has. Yes, sir.
You give a really good speech and you lay all the issues. You give a really good speech and you lay all the issues out, and nobody in this room could disagree with that. It's okay if I say Marianne. Yeah. But we're in Burlington, Iowa. 25,000 people. There's 20 people in this room. The caucuses are only actually a few weeks away. How on earth can you become viable? How do you think you can become viable? How do you think you have one small chance in one small chance in hell winning?
No, I don't.
Please talk.
No, I don't. It began with I did not have the same kind of money. I did not have the same kind of public establishment recognition. After the second debate, there was a lot of talk about me. There was a lot of polling, a lot of national conversation. And I think everybody in this room who was looking can see what happened. After the third day, the kill order obviously came down. And you couldn't look at an article, you couldn't open your computer, you couldn't turn on television that somebody wasn't saying I'm dangerous, I'm crazy, I'm anti-medicine, I'm anti-science, I'm a crystal lady, new age whack job. That was.
Well, they said your Oprah's spiritual advisor was turned off.
But they replaced that as soon as I became popular in the second debate. They knew that once I got on the third debate stage, there would be no stopping this. They knew what I'm saying. You see, they make it like you can't consider her because she's so silly and lightweight. You heard me today. That's not why they got rid of me. They got rid of me because I'm so deadly serious. And I see what they did, and I think a lot of people see what they did. But it's still valuable to me. You heard me.
That's right.
I do feel that I am, in that sense, impacting the political ethers. I think, like any candidate, there's a lot of woulda, shoulda, coulda. When this happened, and I was so vilified and demonized, and even by some of my own political heroes, I couldn't even believe it. People who I couldn't even believe it. It was like a boxer who's, sees stars. I had neither the money nor the knowledge for how to override that. I'm not saying I could have been top tier, but I believe that if I'd been in the third debate, I think I'd be where Yang and Tulsi are today. I think I'd be where Yang and Tulsi are today. So it happened the way it happened. But even if this is my last trip to Iowa, you know, for this, I get to leave here knowing you heard me. That makes sense?
Thank you for doing it.
Yeah.
There still will be people stand for you.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe that.
And part of our message has to be this. Even though she's not viable, we need to be viable.
And I hope, thank you. And I think, I have affection. The candidates, a few of those people I have a lot of affection for and have been very, very lovely. There's a real difference between the candidates and the system. Bernie, Elizabeth, Andrew have been lovely. They're the ones I most agree with politically. But Joe has been very lovely when I've seen him. Corey has been very lovely. And I like to think that nobody will have, one of the reasons I wanted to be in the race, when I was talking about reparations, everybody had to talk about reparations.
Yeah.
And I wanted to hang on for as long as possible because as long as I'm in, they have to talk about it. Once I'm gone, so I hope that all of us will carry the message. What about the kids?
Yeah.
And when somebody says to you, oh, we're gonna have universal preschool, these kids are traumatized before preschool. The vulnerabilities and challenges of American children today go so far beyond what our current infrastructure can handle. Department of Education, et cetera. I hear teachers, and I hear this in Iowa, like I hear it everywhere else. These people who say, any of you, by the way, public school teachers, they say, I can't take it anymore. And we're not even going to do people. We have such behavioral problems in our classrooms. Like I said, you have trauma rooms. Up in Perry, Iowa, a woman was saying 84 of the kids in the elementary school are on suicide watch. We need trauma-informed education. We need community wraparound services. We need violence prevention. We need anti-bullying. We need mindfulness in the schools. We need restorative justice. We need conflict resolution. And we as citizens need to stop being okay with politicians who are talking. They're talking, it's somewhere in the 20th century. This is the 21st century. And it's non-linear more than it's linear. That means it's not just rational analysis that is necessary. A psychological perspicacity is necessary. Emotional intelligence is necessary. You see, when you look at something like slavery, institutionalized suppression of women, even segregation, they were like operable tumors. And so what the generation had to do was excise the tumor. What we've got on our hands now is more like a cancer that is metastasized. And it's wrapped around a lot of healthy organs. You don't want to blow up your government. You don't want to blow up corporations. You don't want to blow up your economy. So what you need in a president is somebody who understands how to navigate a multi-dimensional turbulence. Some of it has to do with the kids, some of it has to do with the regulations, but some of it has to do, it's the tender respect. So that's why the idea of a president whose mind is not limited to that 20th century political linear box is actually what is most necessary in the 21st century.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
In a future administration, Democratic, where would you see yourself playing a role?
Just making noise.
I think I'm, I'll tell you why I ran for president and why I would be I'd be a bad governor. I'd be a bad mayor, and let me tell you why. I'm not a great manager, but we don't need right now a political mechanic. We need a political visionary. The problem is not that we don't have a lot of great political mechanics. We do, a lot of them in the Democratic Party. The problem is not that we don't have enough car mechanics. The problem is that we are on the wrong road. And that's the role of the president. So my talent and my skill set has to do with vision and articulation of where we are. That's what a president does, is to define a vision and public policy and budgetary issues that align with that vision to make it happen. It's the executive branch, but really it's the visionary branch. Do you know what I'm saying? So I don't know. In terms of that question, I am where you are and where all of us are. I'm showing up for my country to the best of my ability at this time. I think that all of us are, me no more, no less, I'm sure, than anyone in this room. So wherever the path of life unfolds in front of me, I will be there, but I don't have any illusions. Most of the people, no, I won't say this, maybe if you keep it alive, it would be different. But in order to actually have a president to establish a Department of Peace, that would have to be a president who's really willing to take on the military-industrial complex. So let's not have any illusions here. There's a reason why we don't have one already. But I'm thinking of actually one candidate who's certainly the other one who's on top of it about the military-industrial complex, and we all know who that is. Anybody else? Anything else? Yes, sir.
No.
Okay. I want to just close by saying there are a lot more lovers than haters in this country. We had the stabbings at the rabbi's house the other night. We have obviously bigots and racists and homophobes and anti-Semites and even Nazis, etc. These people are politicized today more than they had been in a way ever in this country. Well, you can't say that when you had slavery. But there are far more lovers than haters. The problem is that the haters are very convicted today. And they are willing to do whatever it takes to effectuate their worldview. The problem is that conviction is a force multiplier. So the issue is not that they're more haters than lovers. The problem is that the haters have conviction today that is not being displayed by the lovers. And so what I've tried to do with this campaign is to speak to more than your self-interest and more than your individual identity, your age, your sexuality, or whatever. I think we need to think about the fact that we're Americans and we have to deal with what's wrong with America today. So we have to do more than care about our own children. We have to care about children on the other side of town. We have to care about children on the other side of the world. So when people mock turning love into a political force, I would just suggest that you remember that actually it's not naive to think that love should be the guidance system of all public policy. What's naive is to think that we can rationally believe that we're going to last another 100 years on this planet if we don't at least try. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Julie Master. I live in Fairfield, Iowa, and I'm the Iowa State Director. So if you are interested in volunteering, we also, to any kind of donation, will help this message to keep going. So please come talk to me. If you have a network of people that you think would be receptive to this message, please come talk to me. So thank you so much for coming. We have yard signs right here to take, so take a yard sign on your way out. Thank you so much for coming.